All right. Let's see. Okay. I'm just testing this out right now. Let's see if we're good to go. All right. All right. So this is Mike Ratner. I'm doing a Sunday night broadcast here. I like my hairstyle. So I just want to talk quickly about my latest writing called IGO. I just finished last week Cringe Factors. It took me about 10 days to finish that. You can check it out at cringefactors.com. It talks about how hegemony works in the sense that if the powers that be, the oligarchs or the elites, are successful in dividing us, what are the mechanisms? And, people are so attached to their identities. And so I talk about a little bit about this that, well, there's a lot of identity given to you. And so some of us adopt it thinking we own it. But really, it's sort of it owns you. All right, so check that out at cringefactors.com. I'll do another talk about that because I think it's really interesting. But I'm really excited about my recent writing called IGO, IGO. And I think I needed to include this because if you follow my writing as a social critic, social psychologist per se, I'm really interested in understanding sort of the dynamics that keep us as a uh, humanity, which in this case I'm calling a MORB, standing for the modus operandi of rational behavior, MORB, that's really attached to its internal dialogue, which is its ID, internal dialogue. You get it? So we have all these labels, that we've adopted and, we're really proud of and going to go to, you're going to kill for, not realizing you're just being a puppet in play. So we talk a lot about ego, where you might have this sense of pride or extreme narcissism. But I go is really something different. I go. So it's really more the projection we have in mind of when we imagine ourselves doing something or a scenario we wish we fantasize could change. I call it I go because I go there in my mind. And so I think it's an important distinction. So it's an inner form of expression where one describes an imagined self, or really, in this case, it's a projected identity against the screen of my mind. So really, most of us are living in fantasy daydreams that we really have no conception that it's all made up, but we're willing to defend it. And so in that way, we're very attached to our stories, but this image of ego and I go is only existing in these imagined scenarios because we've built this identity up in our mind. So in the writing, which you'll find, Jay, I haven't published it yet. I'm still working on it. You could probably find, I'll create a link on my regular website. If you click on the writing or the books tab under MikeRatner.com, which is me, MikeRatner.com. Otherwise, I'll see if the domain IGO versus ego.com is available. If it is, I'll create that as a link. Otherwise, I'll have it below, which I'm going to have to do very quickly because I'm actually doing this as a live stream to record it. Because I didn't know any other way other than doing a Zoom. But I want to just get these ideas out there to sort of introduce the ideas. So I'll put a link below to my writing that's related to this, talking about the MORB, the modus operandi of rational behavior that lives in the mass trance, which is the hypnosis of society. And it's conditioning and socialization. It is what it is. But assuming that we have this projected identity that I'm naming IGO, it's an automatic part of every human being. And that enables us to relate to who we are or who we presume ourselves to be, and allows us through the BIDEC, which I'll also create a link because it's my creative take on what's called theory of mind. So BIDEC, BIDECK, that talks about our beliefs and our intentions and where that's all coming from, that's relating to our lives. But most of it, the situations where these scenarios that sort of our mind or our ego is playing out in these scenarios, whether they're real or pretended, this realm, the BIDEC, is within ourselves. This is sort of like a filter. So that I'll give a link to, but that all fits into what I'm talking about here. And I hope you'll find the writing really interesting because I think I'm 17 pages into it right now. I think I really will end it pretty soon, so maybe I'll get up to around 20. But I think it's pretty good. It's viable as, social theory, and maybe there could be some element that could be practical in psychology and in understanding our natures. So check it out, and hope you enjoy it. So I think that's about it. I think one thing people say, well, aren't you going to tell us something about it? Well, let me just talk about the self as a reference to why IGO would be perhaps useful, because we're talking about the I, the person, right, being the subject to the same subject, right? So I'm thinking about myself. So we could have a philosophical conversation of the who is thinking about myself and what I perceive myself to be. But this projection, I am terming the IGO, because I'm picturing something in my mind, whether it's a scenario of, the past, or imagining myself in the future doing something, or a fantasy coming true. Who's this person playing this out? So we all have this sense of self, what's called selfhood, or we should anyway. But it's not to be confused really with other areas that, I'll describe in this writing about the ego or narcissism. This is simply just a projection of who I perceive myself to be as an image that's playing out in my mind, which, surprising to me, to myself, has never been termed before, other than the self. And it could be some aspect of self-esteem, your self-worth. However, I think it's really essential to distinguish the IGO, from what is the ego, or term the ego, because they're different in their functioning. And in my writing, I'll give you links again to the MORB below. So morb.masstrance.com. We'll talk about the MORB theory. So ID is my acronym for internal dialogue that the modus operandi of rational behavior, which is the MORB, comprehends as its projected self, which I'm terming the IGO. And it's an interesting consideration because if you look at the ID in the word identity and take off ID, which I call internal dialogue, just take off the ID from identity, what do you have? You have sort of this premise that's creating an imagined entity. Because our identity, and again, I've got a really great writing on this called Cringe Factors, cringefactors.com. And the cringe really is just dividing up what we're perceived as our identity. And some, again, is imposed on us, which is our class, our race, right? And perhaps, the influences, which also are determinants of our income and our nationality, gender, and ethnicity. If you don't like ethnicity, you can use economic status. There's the acronym for cringe, CRINGE, so cringefactors.com. This creates a sort of this entity that plays out, which I'm calling the IGO. And it is an inter-narrative identity, which means it's a composite of how we, or the morbid self, imagines, seeing, and projecting its perceived self that's out there. So IGO's existence is built on the notion that we're a self that's born within a story, right? Because I'm seeing myself in my imagination, doing something, being something, experiencing something, wishing for something. You get the idea. But it's projected as a perceived self, right? So it's not real. IGO's existence is built on a notion that the self that only exists within the story, or at least the narrative that's given to it. So that way, our identities are shaped by the different accounts that we all have in our lives. So a central tenet of my IGO theory, or what's supporting it, is revealed by the ability of each of us as individuals to shape your own lives. And how that happens is through the multiple instances and experiences that we have that in turn go to describe yourself, or this self, IGO, that's an action. So basically, it's projected through this idea of what I call the BIDEC, and that's filled with an internal dialogue of all sorts. Internal dialogue, again, is our ID, which is self-autobiographical. It's an autobiography of different narratives with an associative, what I call a noun reality, because the morb in this realm is only talking about people, places, and things, and that's its noun reality, the only thing it knows. So this, again, exists in a story, whether it's given to you or you've pieced it together of something, and whether or not it's based on facts or it can be confirmed, you're in it through this projection of what I have called the IGO, So hopefully you'll find this of interest. Okay. All right. Well, I think I probably should pause it here, but of course I want to encourage you to do some further writing about it. And my definition is open for interpretation. And I talk about uh, psychodynamics and Freud's interpretation of ego and the id and the superego, and how it's really distinction and different completely from my IGO, although we can see certain aspects that you could see that relate to how one person is subjecting their personality or sees themselves and their internal dialogue, again, which makes up their identity. All right, well, let's see. I got so many windows open, but I want to sort of see if there's anything else I've got to share in this regard. But I do think it's important to kind of make that distinction. I talk a little bit about egomania and people who would be considered an egotist, separate from what I'm talking about. And then basically, ego is Latin for I, or the German ich. And whereas IGO, as a word, and I looked at this, I couldn't find any roots or anything existing as a participle that links I go. It's amazing. It's kind of a word that we might say in a sentence, I go, but it's not a word in itself. It's I go here, I go there. But I'm calling it the I go because that's what's happening in our mind as we project ourselves into this aspect, of our perception of our world, which again, I'm arguing is made up. Kind of excuse my voice today because I've been talking quite a bit. Also, I was cleaning up, so doing a lot of dust and probably chemicals I was used for cleaning that I should have not inhaled. I should have worn a mask, perhaps. Ooh, a mask. All right. Well, anyway, I again hope these ideas are of interest and sort of suitable for your engaged thought. I will get back to you with more of that writing again. You can check more of my writing out at MikeRatner.com, and also this current writing. I'll see if I can get the domain right now. IGO versus ego, EGO.com. Otherwise, check out BIDEC, BIDECK masstrance.com. And then Cringe Factors, I mentioned, cringefactors.com. All right, well, thanks for checking it out. See you.